The morning sun was warm and bright, pouring through the big windows of the kindergarten classroom. It made little specks of dust look like they were dancing in the air. For the children in Mrs. Albright's class, this was the best part of the day. Circle time. It was when they all got to sit together on the big, colorful rug that had pictures of letters and numbers on it. They would sing songs, listen to a story, and talk about their days. The children, a group of energetic 5-year-olds, hurried to find their favorite spots on the rug. They pushed and giggled, each one wanting to sit right next to the teacher. Mrs. Albright was a kind woman who had been teaching for a very long time. She had a warm smile that made the children feel safe. She clapped her hands gently and said, "Okay, everyone, find a comfy spot. It's story time." But one child was not rushing to the rug. A little girl, who we will call Lily, stood perfectly still next to her small, wooden chair. She was a quiet child with big, brown eyes that often looked like they were thinking very hard about something. Her dark hair was tied into 2 little pigtails. Her hands were gripping the back of the chair so tightly that her knuckles were white. Mrs. Albright noticed her right away. "Lily, sweetie, come on over. We're about to start." Lily didn't move. She just shook her head, her eyes looking down at her shiny black shoes. This was not the first time this had happened. It had started a few days ago. At first, Mrs. Albright thought maybe Lily was just feeling shy or was in a little bit of a bad mood. Every child has those days. But this was different. This was the 3rd day in a row that Lily had refused to sit down. She would stand during art time at the table. She would stand during snack time. She would even eat her crackers while standing up. The other children started to notice. One little boy pointed and said, "Look, Lily won't sit down." Mrs. Albright gave him a gentle look. "It's okay, everyone. Let's just focus on our story." She didn't want to make Lily feel more uncomfortable than she already was. She walked over to the little girl and knelt down so she was at her eye level. "Lily, can you tell me what's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft and caring. "Does something hurt?" Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She just pressed her lips together and shook her head again. She wasn't being naughty or difficult. Mrs. Albright could see a real fear in her eyes. It was a look that said she was scared, but she couldn't explain why. The teacher's heart felt a little heavy. She had learned over her many years of teaching that when a child acts in a strange way, there is usually a reason for it. They don't have the words to say, "I'm scared," or "I'm hurt," so they show it with their actions. Lily's action was a silent, stubborn refusal to sit. Mrs. Albright decided not to force her. "Okay, Lily, you can stand right here if you want to, but you can always change your mind and join us. Okay?" The little girl gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. Mrs. Albright went back to the circle of children and began to read a story about a brave little bear. But her mind wasn't fully on the story. She kept glancing at the small, lonely figure standing by the chair. Lily was listening to the story. Her eyes were fixed on the book. She even smiled a little when the bear in the story found his friend. But her feet remained firmly planted on the floor. What was it about sitting down that frightened her so much? Was she having pain somewhere? Was it a problem at home? Mrs. Albright made a mental note to call Lily's mother later, just to check in. She hoped it was just a phase that would pass. But a small, worried voice in the back of her mind told her that this was something more. This was a quiet little girl who was silently screaming for help, without making a single sound. The next day, the sun was hidden behind thick, gray clouds, and a light rain tapped against the classroom windows. The room felt a little darker, a little quieter. Mrs. Albright had hoped that, with a new day, the little girl's strange behavior would have passed. But as soon as the children were told to come to the rug for their morning song, there she was again. The little girl was standing in the exact same spot, her small hands once again holding onto the back of her chair as if it were the only safe thing in the room. This was now the 4th day. What had started as a small worry in the teacher's mind was now growing into a real concern. It was no longer something she could ignore or just hope would get better on its own. The other children were starting to get used to it, but they still whispered and looked her way. "Why does she always stand up?" one of them asked loudly. Mrs. Albright calmly explained that everyone is different, and sometimes people need different things. But inside, she knew this was not just a simple preference. The look on the child's face was not one of choice, but of something much heavier. During playtime, the little girl seemed almost like a different child. She laughed and ran around the playground with the others, her pigtails flying behind her. She went down the slide and swung on the swings. She seemed happy and free when she was moving. But the moment they went back inside and the teacher said, "Okay, everyone, find your seats for snack time," the change was instant. The smile would vanish from her face, replaced by that tight, worried look. She would walk slowly to her chair and stand beside it, her body becoming stiff. Mrs. Albright decided to try a different approach. When the children were busy eating their snacks, she took a small bag of colorful crackers and walked over to the little girl. "Here you go," she said, offering the bag. "You must be hungry after all that running." The little girl took the crackers quietly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost carried away by the sounds of the classroom. Mrs. Albright pulled up a tiny chair and sat down next to her, so she wouldn't be towering over the child. She wanted to create a moment that felt safe and private. "You know," Mrs. Albright began, keeping her voice low and gentle, "you can tell me anything. If something is bothering you, or if something hurts, I am here to help. That's my job, to make sure you are safe and happy at school." The little girl looked down at her crackers, not eating them. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. It was a nervous movement, a constant, subtle fidgeting that the teacher had begun to notice. It was as if she was always uncomfortable, always needing to move to escape some unseen feeling. "Does it hurt to sit down?" Mrs. Albright asked point blank. The child's head snapped up, her big eyes wide with surprise. For a second, it looked like she was about to say something. Her lips parted slightly, and a flicker of something, fear or maybe relief, passed over her face. But just as quickly, the shutters came down. She looked down again, her lower lip trembling, and shook her head. "No," she mumbled into her chest. The teacher's heart sank. The reaction was a clear sign. She was on the right track. Something was wrong, and it was physical. It was about sitting. But the child was too scared to talk about it. Later that afternoon, when the children were resting, Mrs. Albright went to her desk and picked up the phone. She called the little girl's mother. The phone rang a few times before a tired-sounding voice answered. "Hello? Hi, this is Mrs. Albright from school. I'm just calling to check in about your daughter. She's been a little quiet lately, and I wanted to see if everything is okay at home." There was a short pause on the other end. "Oh, she's always been a shy one. A bit dramatic, too. She's fine when she's here with me. Probably just trying to get attention at school." The words felt like a door being closed. Mrs. Albright tried to explain. "It's not that she's misbehaving. It's a specific thing. She refuses to sit down. She stands all day. I'm a little concerned that she might be in some kind of pain." The mother's voice became a little sharper. "Pain? What kind of pain? She hasn't said anything to me. She's perfectly healthy. Like I said, she's probably just being dramatic. Don't let her get away with it. Just make her sit down." The conversation ended shortly after, leaving Mrs. Albright with a cold feeling in her stomach. The mother's dismissal did not match what she was seeing with her own eyes. This was not drama. Drama is when a child throws a tantrum because they want a toy. This was different. This was a silent, persistent, and fearful resistance. She looked across the room at the little girl, who was lying on her rest mat, not sleeping, but just staring at the ceiling. She wasn't seeking attention. If anything, she was trying to become invisible. She was trying to hide her pain without anyone noticing. Mrs. Albright knew, right then, that she could not just make her sit down. That would be cruel. The child was communicating in the only way she knew how, through her silence and her standing. It was a desperate, wordless message, and the teacher was now the only one who was listening. She knew she had to find out what that message meant, no matter what. The weekend came and went, and Monday morning arrived. Mrs. Albright walked into her classroom with a determined feeling. Over the weekend, she couldn't stop thinking about the little girl. She had replayed the scene in her head 100 times. The silent tears, the tight grip on the chair, the fear in her eyes. She knew she couldn't let another week go by without understanding what was happening. The children filed into the classroom, hanging up their little coats and bags. The chatter and laughter filled the room. Mrs. Albright watched the door, her heart beating just a little faster. When the little girl walked in, she looked the same as always, her two neat pigtails and her big, watchful eyes. She went to her cubby, put her things away, and then walked to her chair. And just as she had for days, she stopped beside it and did not sit down. She just stood there, a small, still statue in the middle of the busy room. Mrs. Albright felt a pang of disappointment. A small part of her had hoped that whatever was wrong had magically fixed itself over the weekend. But it hadn't. The problem was still here, and it was real. The morning went on as usual. They did the calendar, they sang the days of the week song. The little girl participated in everything she could do while standing. Her voice was soft but clear when they sang. She was a smart child, and she was listening to everything. But her body remained tense, always ready, always standing. After lunch, it was time for the class's favorite activity. Story time on the big rug. The children scrambled to get their spots, sitting cross-legged and looking up at the big chair where Mrs. Albright sat with a picture book. The teacher took a deep breath. She knew this was the moment of the day that was hardest for the little girl. "Okay, friends, let's all get cozy for our story," Mrs. Albright announced. Everyone settled down. Everyone except one. The little girl stood by her chair, her shoulders hunched up near her ears. She looked like a tiny animal trying to make itself small. One of the other children, a boy with a loud voice, pointed right at her. "She's doing it again. She won't sit down." This time, his words seemed to break something inside the little girl. Her face, which had been so still and controlled, suddenly crumpled. A quiet sob escaped her lips, and then another. Big, heavy tears rolled down her cheeks. She didn't wail or make a loud noise. She cried silently, her small body shaking from the effort of holding it all in. The classroom went quiet. The other children stared, their eyes wide. They had never seen her cry before. Mrs. Albright's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. She put the book down immediately. "Class," she said, her voice firm but calm, "I want everyone to look at the cover of this book. Look very closely at the picture. I'll be right back." She walked slowly over to the crying child. She didn't want to scare her. The little girl was trembling, her tears falling onto the front of her shirt. Mrs. Albright knelt down on the floor so she wasn't standing over her. She was right there at her level. "Shoo, it's okay," she whispered, her voice as soft as a blanket. "You are not in trouble. I promise you are not in trouble." She reached out very slowly and put a hand on the child's arm. The little girl flinched for a second, but then she didn't pull away. "I can see that you are very, very sad and very scared," Mrs. Albright continued, looking right into her wet, fearful eyes. "And I think you are hurt. I need to be a good teacher and make sure you are okay. Can you let me help you? Can you trust me?" The little girl didn't nod or shake her head. She just stood there, crying silently. Mrs. Albright knew she had to look. Her mind was racing with possibilities. Was there a sharp pin in her clothes? A bad rash? She had to know. Keeping her eyes locked on the child's face to reassure her, Mrs. Albright moved her other hand slowly towards the girl's simple, cotton skirt. She didn't pull it or yank it. She just gently touched the back of the fabric with her fingertips. And that's when she felt it. It wasn't the soft, smooth cotton she was expecting. Beneath the fabric, she felt something hard, something lumpy and uneven. Her blood ran cold, with her heart pounding in her ears. She carefully lifted the hem of the skirt, just a few inches, just enough to see the back of the little girl's legs. What she saw made her gasp. She felt the air leave her lungs. The child's small thighs and the backs of her knees were covered in a terrible patchwork of colors. Dark purple bruises that looked like storm clouds. Angry red welts that were raised on her skin. Some marks were old and fading to a sickly yellow-green. Others were fresh and dark. It was a map of pain. A story of hurt, written over and over again on her skin. Mrs. Albright quickly let the skirt fall back into place. She felt dizzy. She felt sick to her stomach. This was so much worse than anything she had imagined. This was not a simple accident. This was not a fall on the playground. These were the marks of a belt, or a stick. These were marks made by a person. The little girl was still crying, her whole body trembling now, as if she had been found out, as if she was waiting to be punished for telling the secret without using any words. Mrs. Albright looked at her, and all the fear on the child's face made perfect sense now. Of course she couldn't sit down. Sitting down would press against those terrible bruises. It would cause her unimaginable pain. She had been standing for days to protect herself from that pain. The teacher's own eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back hard. This was not the time for her to cry. This little girl needed her to be strong. She needed a grown-up to finally do something. For a moment, the whole world seemed to stop. The cheerful sounds of the classroom, the rustling of pages, the mumbling of the children looking at the book, all of it faded into a distant hum. All Mrs. Albright could see were those terrible marks on the little girl's legs. All she could feel was a cold, hard knot tightening in her stomach. This was not a simple fall. This was not an accident. The pattern was too clear, too deliberate. The dark purple and angry red lines told a story of repeated, brutal hurt. Someone had done this to the child. The thought was so awful it was difficult to even hold in her mind. The little girl was still trembling, her silent tears now a river down her face. She looked up at her teacher, her eyes filled with a deep, bottomless fear. She looked like she was waiting to be shouted at, as if she had done something terribly wrong by showing her pain. Mrs. Albright knew she had to be the calm one. She had to be the rock. Her own heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she forced her voice to be soft and steady. She gently squeezed the child's arm. "It's okay," she whispered again, her voice thick with emotion she was fighting to control. "You are so brave. You have been so brave for so long." She stood up slowly, her own legs feeling weak. She took the little girl's small, cold hand in hers. "Come with me, sweetheart. Let's find a super comfy spot for you." She led her away from the chair, away from the staring eyes of the other children, over to the cozy reading corner. There was a big, soft beanbag chair there, the color of a blueberry. It was fluffy and sank down when you sat in it, almost hugging you. "Look," Mrs. Albright said, trying to sound cheerful. "This is the special chair. It's very soft. You can rest here and it won't hurt. I promise." She helped the little girl settle into the beanbag. The child sank into the softness, her body relaxing just a little. The relief on her face was immediate and heartbreaking. For the first time in days, she was able to rest her body without pressing on her injuries. Mrs. Albright handed her a favorite picture book from the shelf. It was about a friendly dragon. "You just look at this book right here. I need to go make a very important phone call. I'll be right over at my desk where you can see me. You are safe." The little girl nodded slowly, her sobs turning into quiet sniffles. She held the book in her lap, her small fingers tracing the picture of the dragon on the cover. Mrs. Albright walked to her desk. It felt like the longest walk of her life. Each step was heavy. Her mind was racing. She knew exactly what she had to do, but the reality of doing it was terrifying. She sat down in her chair, the familiar squeak of it sounding unusually loud in the quiet room. She picked up the classroom phone. It felt cold and heavy in her hand. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the buttons. 911. She held the receiver to her ear, listening to the ring. It rang once, twice. She glanced over at the reading corner. The little girl was watching her, her big eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. Then, a calm, professional voice answered on the other end. 911. What is your emergency? For a second, Mrs. Albright's voice got stuck. She cleared her throat, leaning forward and speaking in a low, urgent whisper. She didn't want to frighten the other children. Yes, hello. My name is Eleanor Albright. I am a kindergarten teacher at Oakwood Elementary School. She gave the address, her words coming out in a rush. I need to report. I need to report a case of suspected child abuse. She took a shaky breath. I have a 5-year-old student in my class. I've seen extensive bruising and welts on the backs of her legs. It's very bad. It is clearly not from an accident. She has been refusing to sit down for days because of the pain. The operator on the other end was calm and efficient.
Okay, Mom.
Help is on the way. Can you tell me the child's name? Mrs. Albright gave the little girl's name, her voice breaking as she said it. Are you both in a safe location now? The operator asked. Yes, Mrs. Albright said, looking over at the child who was now gently leaning against the soft blue beanbag, the book open in her lap. We are in my classroom. The other children are here too. Police and an ambulance are being dispatched, the operator said. Stay on the line with me until they arrive. Mrs. Albright held the phone to her ear, listening to the operator's steady voice. She kept her eyes fixed on the little girl in the beanbag chair. The child looked small and vulnerable, but for the first time she also looked like she was resting. The terrible secret was out. The weight she had been carrying alone was now being shared. The standing was over. Now the healing could begin. The minutes after the phone call felt both incredibly long and terribly short. Mrs. Albright stayed on the line with the 911 operator, her voice a low murmur as she answered questions. Her eyes never left the little girl in the blue beanbag chair. The child was still looking at the picture book, but she wasn't really turning the pages. She was just holding it, her body nestled deep into the softness that didn't hurt her. The other children in the class could feel that something big was happening. The room was too quiet. They looked from their teacher on the phone to the little girl in the corner, their young minds sensing a seriousness they didn't understand. Then, from down the hallway, came the sound. First, it was a far-off wail, like a distant siren. Then it grew louder and louder until it was right outside the school. The bright, flashing red and blue lights from the parking lot danced through the classroom windows, painting the walls with moving colors. The children all turned their heads towards the windows, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. It's the police! One of them whispered loudly. Mrs. Albright spoke softly into the phone. They're here, she said to the operator. Thank you. She hung up the phone just as the school principal and a secretary appeared at the classroom door. Their faces were pale and worried. The principal came quickly over to Mrs. Albright's desk. Eleanor? What's going on? The police and an ambulance are here. Mrs. Albright stood up, her legs still feeling a little unsteady. She kept her voice low so the children couldn't hear. She quickly explained what she had seen on the little girl's legs. The principal's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with horror. A moment later, 2 police officers, a man and a woman, walked into the classroom. They weren't rushing or looking scary. They moved calmly and quietly. Behind them were 2 paramedics in dark blue uniforms, carrying a large bag. The sight of all these strangers made the little girl in the beanbag shrink back. She pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to hide. The female police officer had a kind face. She knelt down a few feet away from the beanbag chair, not too close. She gave the little girl a small, gentle smile. Hi there, she said, her voice soft. My name is Officer Lisa. We heard you might have some owies that need looking at. Is it okay if my friends, who are doctors, take a look? They can help make the owies feel better. The little girl looked past the officer, her eyes searching for Mrs. Albright. The teacher was already walking over. She knelt down next to the officer. It's okay, Mrs. Albright said, her voice full of reassurance. These are the good guys. They are here to help you. You can trust them. I'll be right here with you the whole time. The little girl looked at her teacher's kind, familiar face. Then she gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. The paramedics moved slowly and carefully. They didn't ask her to move. They just talked to her in calm, soothing voices as they very gently examined the bruises on her legs. They spoke to each other in quiet, serious tones, writing things down on a clipboard. The female police officer stayed right there, talking softly to the child, asking her about the picture book. The other children were quietly led out of the classroom by the secretary to go to the library for a special, unexpected story time. The room became very quiet. The police officers spoke with Mrs. Albright and the principal, getting all the details. They listened carefully as Mrs. Albright described the phone call with the mother, and the child's refusal to sit down for days. Later, a woman from a special government office that helps children arrived. She was called a social worker. She had a warm smile and a calm manner. She spoke with the little girl for a little while, and then she gently explained that she was going to take her to a safe place, to see a special doctor, and then to stay with a kind aunt for a little while. The little girl looked confused and scared. She reached out and grabbed Mrs. Albright's hand, holding it tightly. "Can my teacher come?" she asked the social worker, her voice so small it was almost a whisper. Mrs. Albright's heart swelled with both love and sadness. She squeezed the little hand back. "I can't come right now, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle. "But I will be right here at school, waiting for you. And this nice lady will take very good care of you. I promise." She helped the little girl put her coat on. As they walked towards the classroom door, the child stopped and turned around. She looked back at her teacher, her big brown eyes no longer filled with just fear, but also with a tiny, new spark of something else. It looked like hope. Mrs. Albright watched them walk down the hallway, the social worker holding the little girl's hand. The story that had started with a silent, standing child had now found its voice. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. There would be doctors and questions, and a long process of healing for the little girl, both on the outside and on the inside. But it was an ending to the fear. The secret was out. The person who had hurt her would not be able to do it again. Mrs. Albright stood in the doorway of her empty, quiet classroom. The little wooden chair was still sitting by itself. She thought about how a child's cry for help doesn't always come as a loud scream. Sometimes it comes as a silence. Sometimes it's a simple, stubborn refusal to sit down. And the most important thing in the world is for someone to be paying close enough attention to notice, to care, and to be brave enough to ask why.